Hello, welcome everybody. Welcome back. It's been a few weeks. I know. I'm sorry, but it is me, Cyber Warrior. This is CyberWarriorStudios, and we are back for another amazing episode of Security Happy Hour. With me, as always, I have my partner in crime, my comedic relief, my friend, and the founder of Raices, Eric Bellardo. And then also with me today, we have Sarah and Seth. And now, I ain't gonna lie, it was a fight to get anybody on this week. It took some doing and some coaxing. You know, I had to twist some arms and really, convince people to come on. I don't know why. Maybe it's me. It could be me. But but it is great to have you both on here. So without further ado, before we get into the topics at hand, which of course is going to be threat intel, SecOps, and blue team training, being that I don't know as much about you two as I would like, let's touch a little bit on how you got into cybersecurity. Now, I don't need your whole life story because everybody's is different, and that could probably take an entire episode to go over everybody's complete journey. Sarah, me and you talked. We're going to have an episode dedicated to journeys. So knowing that yours is kind of out there, just kind of how you got into it and how you found cyber from where you were at, ideally, and what made you choose this career field as of late.
Sure, happy to answer that real quick. I have a lot of practice talking about my background, so I should make this pretty concise. About 10 years ago, I was an animal cruelty investigator, specializing in internet, web-based crimes against animals, YouTube videos, Facebook, things like that. At the time, I didn't know what threat intel was, but through the work I was doing, I was performing a lot of OSINT collection on perpetrators, collecting evidence, digital evidence, things like that. I left that job, wanted to do something more formal, web-based. I found out about cybersecurity, followed the threat intel track with grad school, and here I am. Real short.
Nice though, but it's crazy how you came from one to the other, right? And we see that. I've been seeing that more and more lately with people just finding cybersecurity kind of later in life or later in their career path. You come from, we have people anywhere that were baristas that decided to go to cybersecurity later on, people that came from, we have a friend of ours that worked in the library for years and then came to cybersecurity. So it's always interesting to hear people's stories. So definitely on a future episode, Sarah, me and you are going to sit down and have a long conversation on how your journey came about. But it is good to see other people finding this career. Yeah. So Seth, why don't you give us, your kind of short story on how you got into it?
Yeah, so it's kind of crazy because it was actually because of 9/11, which sounds totally odd, but so I'm old. I'll preface the story with that. In 2001, I started a company with a friend of mine, and I had come from systems and network administration. he came from the airport and airline industry, and we were building wireless applications. And this was like Bluetooth, 802.11, like all these were like new technologies at the time, and people didn't know how to use them. And as we were building these applications, 9/11 happened, and we didn't know if we had a company anymore. Like, what airline's going to use a wireless application after 9/11? And the airports came back to us and said, can you control who comes on the network and who doesn't come on the network? And so we ended up building what ended up becoming a network access control product. And so we built that, and it was bought by Tipping Point and ended up working for Tipping Point. And so that's 9/11 got me into network security.
That's awesome. And it's always crazy. Like I said, you started out with, I'm doing this. Oh, sure, we can make this happen and make this work. And now you're here.
It's crazy. Yeah,
it is. And you know, for some people, that's what it takes. It just takes that intrigue or that one chance to like, hey, can this happen? Is this possible? And me and my dad have that conversation a lot because he works in GRC and deals with risk and compliance and stuff. So it's always interesting when he starts talking to me about some of the things they see. And he's like, hey, is it possible to get around this? Yes. It takes some know-how, but yes, it's possible. So it's always crazy to me. Now, before we go any further, I did say I'm going to do a giveaway tonight. I did. And it is for 1 month of Try Hack Me. So if you want to get in on that, use the hashtag Blue Team, because guess what? This episode is all about threat intel, blue teams, SecOps. So it's a blue team episode. So use hashtag Blue Team to get in on the giveaway. And once we get those in, and at the end of the episode, we'll do the giveaway. So if you're not here, you don't get it, plain and simple. Which means you got to watch the entire thing. Who knew? But without further ado, let's start with threat intel. And it's because there is so many people like to segregate their fields, right? It's blue team, it's red team, it's threat intel, it's GRC. And the reality of it is, if we don't work together, we get nowhere. So that whole purple team idea, theory, construct, whatever you want to call it, is very valid. And I find threat intel feeds into that, because you can't have blue team without threat intel. So Sarah, as the SME on this call in threat intel, being that that's the field you're in, give us your take on threat intel in and of itself, and kind of how you feel it feeds the SecOps and blue team side of things.
Well, the most important thing about threat intel is having IP addresses and plugging them into your SecOps. Only triggering on IP addresses. And I'm totally kidding. Totally kidding. That is not CTI. So when I think of CTI as it's plugged into blue team, it's kind of full circle, right? You have your blue team, you have your red team, and you have your CTI, and we feed into each other. So CTI is the eyes on the street, the eyes on the outside of the business, the outside of the organization, eyes on the landscape, right? And then you take that information you're seeing, you work with blue team, you work with red team, plug it into red team engagements, do some testing, and then blue team kind of fills in the gaps there. So the way I see CTI, we are customer oriented, right? So we are delivering a service to customers. Blue teams are our number one customer. So we should be, a good CTI program should be supporting the detections that blue team responds to, the alerts that blue team responds to.
Right. And I'm getting echoed. Seth, why don't you give us your take on kind of how you see CTI and how it feeds into SecOps and blue team? And do you find a lot of blue teams or SOC operations are missing out on that threat intel piece? Are they not relying on some of the feeds, or do they not have teams, or is that missing in a lot of those operations?
You know what? Great question. And I absolutely agree with your first sentiment around just purple teaming. And I think we are in this all together, and red teams need to understand the security controls that blue teams use, and threat intel needs to understand how they are being applied, et cetera. You know, I've seen a few things in practice. You know, there certainly more mature security teams are leveraging threat intel in a fairly sophisticated manner. I mean, they're really understanding indicators of compromise, taking those IOCs, placing them into security controls, building out playbooks around those detections. Less mature teams, they're just plugging them into their security controls. So they'll take a feed, whether it's URL, domain-based, IP-based, plugging it into a Splunk, into their next-gen firewall, and hoping magic happens. And as we know, that there's just too many false positives are going to come up through that approach, and it's going to create such a burden on the blue team to now figure out what's what with that approach. And so trying to create a more maturity around that model is going to just help, I think, everyone involved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And another thing is, you mentioned the domains and the IPs and the IOCs. And one of the things that I keep on telling a lot of the teams that I work with on this is, what is your assets? What are your assets? So if you plug in threat intelligence as it's coming in from a feed and you don't have that technology, what good is it? So understand your environment, understand the threats that are out there, and then that's how you measure what is it that I'm going to bring into my environment. If I want to see all the threats that are against my Cisco or Fortinet or whatever technology is, then tailor your cyber threat intelligence to those technologies that you have. That's going to shorten your time from detection to putting it into your defensive operations, into your vulnerability management. How I detected something. There's a vulnerability for a device. I own those devices. And now I got to find out how many of those devices are vulnerable to this detection or this threat. And then that way you can measure your level of risk.
Yeah, very much. And here on Twitch, we have the comment: be like water, be very fluid, be transparent in what you do and how you do things. And I think that's missing out in a lot of what we do. I've worked in consulting for a while, whether it was, for one company or another, blue team, red team, what I'm doing now. I've been in consulting, and I see a lot of organizations have this separation between their security, and whether they be blue or red, it doesn't matter, but they both, are separate if they even have a red team. And then even IT. And I do want to do an episode later on down the line. I want to get some sysadmins on here because and network people and things of that nature, because I see this huge disconnect between security and IT. And when you're looking at threat intel, when you're looking at SOC operations and SecOps as a whole, and you're looking at blue teams, we should not want to be different from IT. We should work closely with them, or else how else are you going to secure everything? Because your security and what you want to implement, whether that be per regulation or policy or whatever guidance you're going by, it requires IT to implement. Very rarely is a security person the one managing the routers and switches and Active Directory. I mean, they may have management of the firewalls. Some do, some don't. It really depends on where you work, but more often than not, a lot of this stuff is managed by your network admins and your sysadmins and things like that. So if you don't have that relationship, that connection with them, and that rapport, they're not going to do anything unless their boss tells them to. So if you don't have that teamwork, that environment, then you're missing out on a lot of what threat intel you're getting, because they're not going to implement it. So you have to rely on your SIM, your Carbon Black, your EDR or XDR solution or something like that to be able to catch these things. And it's not always guaranteed if you don't have the logging put in place or certain things implemented to be able to make that difference. So talking about that, and I keep bringing up the topic, and it's SecOps and SOC operations and things like that. And more so, Seth, this was a topic you wanted to touch on, so I want to kind of dig in deeper. What is your take on SecOps, and really where do you think we're missing a piece to it, or is there something we can do better, or something we're like overcompensating for? Like, really, what's your take on security operations right now in the environment?
Yeah, and I'm interested to get everyone's take, because you guys are practitioners. You guys are living and breathing. You're in the trenches of this, and I kind of see it a little bit as an outsider. And I keep, trying to create tools that I think are going to help. And I really feel like security operations is just broken. I think the alarm-based workflow we use in security operations is broken because it's sort of like the postman who keeps getting mail and has to deliver mail every day, and the mail just keeps growing and growing and growing. We just have this this love affair with alarms, and I feel like there has to be a completely different approach to how we instead of triaging individual alarms, which capture very small symptoms of attacks, to be able to see attacks more multi-stage and understand the full progression and sequence of those attacks.
Right.
And the whole false positive thing, that's a whole other thing. But let me pause there. I'm just kind of curious. If I say security operations is broken, I thought I saw some heads nodding. What do you think?
Well, Sarah, if you want to chime in here, I know you're in threat intel, but again, you still see the security operations side.
Yep.
What's your take on how these things operate, and what issues are you seeing with SecOps?
Yeah, so when I was in enterprise, on the enterprise side of the house with doing CTI, we were, elbow to elbow with Blue Team every single day. SecOps. I think one of the biggest challenges is the false positive fatigue. And when you're working on enterprise side, there's audit requirements for certain alerting and monitoring and detections. And I mean, whether or not they're practical, I'm probably going to get yelled at from audit people, but whether or not these detections are practical or just a box, to check, but they're doing is they're causing fatigue, queue fatigue, ticket fatigue, and they're not allowing or empowering SecOps practitioners to get to pull harder at those threats, right? One of the coolest part of being in SecOps is you're literally on the front line. You see every bad thing that happens to your organization first. And I can't tell you how many times I've never formally been in SecOps, like as a SecOps analyst, but one of my other roles, we had the follow the sun model, and it was all hands on deck, right? Everybody had to be part of that rotation. So I did get my dose of SecOps that way. And one of the coolest things I thought, like, I can take this case and I can chase it down and I can pivot and look at my network and look for threat intel. What is this weird IP address? What is this weird behavior that this file, why is this person accessing this? But when you're in SecOps and you're racing against SLAs, tickets adding up in the queue, you're bored, you don't get a chance to chase the cool stuff. And that to me, and it's a very people-centric problem, like problem for those poor practitioners, right? But that I think is the biggest challenge in SecOps right now.
So go ahead. Yeah, I absolutely agree with it. I mean, that is the reflections I hear from other security analysts as well. And I want to make it sound so silly. I want to make security fun again. Like, I don't know security analysts who got into security to look at like alarms for 4 hours of their day, and then the other 4 hours they're staring at logs trying to understand what those alarms mean. That's the brain damage that I think we need to get away from as an industry. And when I look at a lot of the new innovation, the new innovations in the market, it to me it seems like more of the same. There's a lot of more of the same out there, and so I'm a proponent for let's think radically. How do we really reimagine security operations?
Well, I'm going to add my 2 cents on this.
Please.
Let me give you a little bit of background on me. So I've been running security operations centers and cyber fusion centers for the last 10 years. And I've seen from what you're talking about, the reading of the logs and just alerting on different things, to now where we have some systems that you alluded to. Is this an alarm, or is this something that machine learning is telling us that is using a specific MITRE attack framework? And then you can chase it a little bit more deeper or understand how it's pivoting through your system. So SIMs by themselves are kind of stupid. They're just an alert. signature-based alerts. And to counter both what you guys were saying is, if you are doing a security operations center and you don't have a level 1, level 2, level 3, or tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, where the base analyst, the level 1, is taking the alerts and saying, this looks bad, let me do my initial, you know, bring in the CTI, bring in this other piece and say, this looks bad, I'm going to elevate it. And then you've got a level 2 analyst that is now pulling on those threads. And when they get to a certain point, they say, I need some help. And they bring the forensics people, be it the data forensics or the network forensics or the more experienced threat intelligence people, to bring it together, so that they can then declare an event, or declare an alert. Um, there's different ways of putting this, and it depends on the maturity of that security operations center. Are we going to bring in the 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 security operations people, the SecOps people, that are going to do the work, but it's the analysts of level 1, level 2, level 3 that are going to look, investigate, and say, this is what we need to do. Let's put it up to SecOps to fix, and then let's get our vulnerability management people to figure out if we did fix it, and then give it to the red team to say, let's test that fix. But that whole process and that whole run book and operations is I'll call it a level 4, level 5 mature SOC. And the industry right now is still in the level 1, level 2s.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, okay, I'm going to shut up and let you guys talk.
Yeah. So my thing on it is, because I work with SIM a lot. I was a SIM engineer for for a few years. I've been offensive, defensive. I've been both sides of the fence. And a SIM, though you can get alarm fatigue, if you do your due diligence and you provide that TLC that a SIM requires, you have a lot less false positives. And I think that's where the problem comes in, is when we talk about maturity of organizations. They pull up a SIM, they throw up a SIM, and they may pay for ProServe initially to set it up. They may not. Who knows? But if they don't have an MSSP, they're relying on one, maybe two people that maybe never used that software before, to configure it and to tune it and do all that stuff. And if they don't, then it's just alarm after alarm after alarm, if you get any at all. Because I've seen it both ways. I've seen to where you get none, and literally you're like, why do I have a sit? No one's breached. I have no alarms. What's going on? Or I get the ones that, oh, I have alarms all day and I can't get through all 1,000 of these. Well, because you haven't tuned it. You have an alarm for somebody scanning your network, and I'm sorry, you get scanned every day, so you're going to get that alarm every day if you have an alarm for it. One of the things I work with my clients on SIMs is, you don't want that initial you're being brute forced alarm. That happens. You're going to get those all the time. A scanning alarm you're going to get all the time. You want to be able to correlate these alarms. So if you see brute forcing from this IP and then you see authentication, that's when you want notified, because that's when they got in. And yeah, it's reactive, but if you are actively going after and chasing down all these common alarms, then that's all you're going to do all day. You're never going to get a bit of downtime. So I work with them to tune things to where you can see it in your dashboard that you're being brute forced or scanned or whatever. Yeah, you can pull it up in your events. You can see those logs. But it's more so if something happens, you want to be able to stop it. You can't block every IP. I'd love to say you can, but you can't. So if you want to say, I want to see all brute forcing so I can block these IPs, well, then your network guys are going to be busy, because they're going to be blocking IPs left and right. Whether they're being scanned or brute force, that's all they're going to do all day is putting blocks. It's monotonous and it's pointless, because then you're blocking half the internet. And someone might be going through a VPN. So now somebody else uses that same VPN, happens to come out on the other end, and they can't get to your site now. So that type of work is just pointless.
That's why there's other technologies that are going to help you. So now you've got your SIM, and a good security operations center has a lot of tools in the toolbox. So you've got your SIM, you've got your SOAR, you've got your NAC, you've got your info blocks, you've got all these different technologies that work together. But if you don't know how to put it together into a process that is people centric, is I've got some threat intelligence, you've got MISP, you've got some other tools that help you bring in that information. You get it into your SIM, you evaluate it, and then you say, there's an action to take, and you send it out. And they can just block it in the NAC or block it in the firewalls or something like that. But you have to put the end-to-end solution in place. And now we've got some solutions, and we're using one of the solutions that is an MLA. I hate saying AI, but ML solution that starts looking at those patterns and can give you a better idea of what's going on. That's why I hate when people say Splunk is a SIM or Elk is a SIM. No, it's a log aggregator. Okay. And if you're using it right, you can gather all your information and put it into something else.
If I can add on to that, and something actually I want to piggyback from what you were saying there, and maybe for the record, full transparency, I ran product management for a SIM for 8 years, so I am not disparaging SIM. I agree that SIM is a very useful tool for the security operations, and still very much part of the kind of the cornerstone of that operation.
It's useful if implemented properly and has the right engineering behind it. If it was set up improperly from the start, then it's not going to do you any good, because now your team that's coming in, maybe that team got fired or they quit and a new team came in, they're trying to fix what's broken.
Oh yeah, I mean the most common failed SIM deployment that I saw, and I saw a lot, were just put all your data in the SIM and then figure out what you got. That is probably the worst approach to deploying a SIM. It really it should be use case oriented. What is the use case we are trying to solve? What data sources do we need to solve that? What analytics do we? What is the questions we're asking of that data? And I think, Eric, the point you're making now, let's really think through from tool to tool, information source through the workflow. How do we enact that? The one thing I wanted to add to what Derek was saying is you were talking about how don't just look at brute force authentications. Those are going to happen. This is the most interesting. This concept of taking an alarm-based workflow and trying to turn it into what I'm going to call, for lack of better words, an incident-based workflow. How do we get from alarms to I now have a sequence of activities that represents something much more interesting because the sum is greater than the parts. That is, and I've tried it. This is where I think SIMs are. It's hard for SIMs to do because alert aggregation is really crude. Like I can look for all the alerts that are coming from this host or from this user, but that's a really crude way to try to pull together alerts that might now represent an incident. And there are new technologies that are, I believe, painting a much more understanding of what's happening by looking at activities and alerts more holistically.
I'm a big fan of SOAR for that purpose. I was lucky enough to work for I consider very mature SOC on that enterprise side, and their SOAR implementation was almost, dare I say, breathtaking, just to see like how everything could work, and some automation of those low hanging fruit alerts, things like that. Really was kind of like a breath of fresh air, right? So I think those SOAR solutions are really awesome. And any like behavioral based alerting, you run into like prioritization of these alerts and what's coming into the queue, how do you score it? So I think putting heavier weight into behavioral alerting instead of indicator or observable driven alerting will be much better, much kinder to everybody's mental and emotional being when it comes to work.
And what I've seen lately is there is a increase of SOAR in some of your SIM platforms. So if you take something like Logarithm, for instance, which I've worked with a lot over the years, they have playbooks and runbooks that tie into your different devices to where if you see something, it'll do something. If you say, hey, if this alarm or this event triggers, go do these things. Go automatically tie in, block an IP or whatever. But here's the problem. And it's an issue with the way we kind of go about changes in clients or in companies as a whole. I love CRBs or cabs or whatever you want to call them, your change review boards. I think they're amazing in a lot of different contexts. But when it comes to security events, they're a waste of time because there are certain things that you want to put in play and you need to do immediately.
Yeah.
But because so many clients and so many companies rely on those review boards, it makes it difficult that, hey, if I see this, go do this right away. A lot of companies will say you can't do that. You have to go through us first before you push the go button to go do it.
Yeah.
And it's not all of them. I think a lot of mature organizations realize that there are things that are going to be automated, but some will still rely on, well, you can't block you can't go block this thing because it may require us to review, well, what it's going to affect, which I understand. And I understand that concept. But to me, there's certain security points in time with certain security alerts, alarms, and events that you have to be able to just immediately respond.
So let me stop you there for a second and give you my perspective working in some global organizations that had very strong CAB or CRB or and for our viewers, that's control boards or change
Review
board.
boards. Yeah.
Um, so a mature change board will have something called an emergency change, okay, which is what security people can use to act on a vulnerability or an issue that cannot go through the basically let me put a band-aid in, okay, and that's what we use in those events where something is happening that we have to take care of. So the change board can't stop the security people from doing something quickly. But if we want to say unplug something, or change an architectural thing to solve a problem, that is where the change board can happen because I've seen security teams that overuse this and create problems from the enterprise.
Oh, for sure. That knee jerk reaction and I've seen that in tabletops and things like that where you'll have someone say, well, my knee jerk reaction would be to just turn it off. Well, you can't do that. When it comes to IR and incident handling, if you say turn it off, you've lost a lot of your evidence right there.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to give you another one. You are a healthcare organization that requires that device to be active or that connection to be active, because if not, a doctor can't reach a patient or a machine can't work. So what do you do then?
Yeah. Well, and hospitals are always going to be tricky. Your
Yeah.
medical institutions and hospitals are always going to be tricky because you look at the fact that a lot of these are built on antiquated architecture and antiquated operating systems. So they already are in a situation where they can't even patch or update, let alone say, hey, yeah, you can automatically go do this. If you can't patch, then I don't even feel comfortable automating a security operation. Like I don't feel comfortable saying, go ahead and do this right away.
Okay, so full circle here. You've got organizations that cannot use a SOAR
Yeah.
because you can't automate a response to something because you might break something. Okay, so that's when the playbooks and the SOAR need to be tied to that organization. We can't just take what Cortex gives us or some other organization, other SOAR gives us. Okay, we have to tailor it to the organization. So going back to Seth's questions, how do we get those SOCs or those security operations or those alerting organizations to a more mature space? And that leads us to training of the leadership. Okay. How do we get those leaders that are maybe been doing 10 years on QRadar or FortiSIM or, any of these traditional SIMs, Alien Vault or something like that. And they're just accustomed to, okay, alert 1, let's do this. Alert 2, let's do this. Alert 3, let's do this. And they're accustomed to that. But now they have to look at the ecosystem of event management, but they don't know that. So that, I think, is the crux of the next thing, is how do we educate those people?
How do we educate everybody? So that was the next, and you led us right to it, Eric. This is why I love you. The next topic at hand is blue team training, and it was brought up by Jermaine on YouTube. He asked about Try Hack Me. Do they have a blue team path or a defender path? Which they do. Now, does it go over tuning SIMs? I don't know. But what I do know is there's not enough blue team training out there. I can name a company right now that I was on the advisory board for, SecurityBlue.team. They do amazing training. I can vouch for what their exam and their certification, because it is absolutely amazing. But to say there's a lot of blue team training out there, Eric, why are you drinking your office now, Eric? Look, for those listening on the podcast, you need to tune in live and watch this on YouTube, because Eric is always doing something crazy. But what training, and Sarah and Seth, I'm really going to ask you to, because it's been a while since I've seen anything that wasn't vendor oriented or security blue team. It's very rare that I see anything that is blue team oriented, right? Unless it's paid for. So you can pay for SANS, you can pay for a vendor training, but what other than that, everything we see is OSCP or CEH or some other certification that is all red team. What do the blue teamers have to teach them SIM and SOAR and behavioral analytics and all these other different concepts, MDR, XDR, and everything like that?
Such a good question. I'll say
amongst yourselves.
I will say I am a huge fan, and this is partially selfish because I'm terrible at taking exams, period. So trying to get a certification is like a big challenge for me, just because my exam anxiety. But I am and always have been a huge fan of mentoring, finding people in the field that you really like and you mesh with. I mean, the thing about Infosec is, yeah, there's drama, but there's also a lot of people that are really tuned in to everything, right? Like I feel like this community is a very active community online. So to find a mentor isn't that challenging, right? So I'm a big fan of mentoring. Blue team training, I think, is a little tricky because every company is going to have a different style, a different SOC. They're going to have their content is going to be labeled differently. Their alert prioritization structure is going to be different. The SIMs are all going to be everything will be different. So it's really, really hard to hone, yeah, the drama, to hone in on a specific training that will be really, really helpful. So I built an onboarding kind of like a boot camp, like a 30, 60, 90-day milestone training for CTI when I was at my old job. And I think every manager that's in like a security operations setting at an organization should have that. And I'm not saying mine was the best. I'm just saying that it was structured so that you had some foundational concepts of the role, but also some specific understanding of the environment that you're in, like financial specifically, right? So what's the priority here? What are the prioritized alerts? Like what, you got to get in that mindset. So blue team training is tricky. It's tricky.
You know what I found interesting, because I've looked at this for a while, in that if you go outside of security and like look at developers and the training they have, like I want to become a Scrum Master, I want to become agile, I want to learn how to do safe. It's all process oriented. When you look at security, it's all tool oriented. It's like I'm Splunk certified, I'm ArcSight certified. It's very telling how tool centric our training is, and that's not always the case. If you go to other disciplines, it's not always focused on a tool. It could be focused on a process, it could be focused on something else. So it's an observation. I agree with you. There's a lot of there's a lot of free tools for red teamers. You can go and I can download BoneHub, a BoneHub image from bonehub.com. I've got Kali Linux. I download Metasploit, and now I'm starting to hack, and it's all free. And that's not even training. That's just bringing down stuff and doing it, just trying to do it hands-on. We don't really have that in the blue team world. And at the end of the day, we're trying to protect organizations. We're not trying to hack them. So it is interesting that a lot of the fun tools out there are more on the red team side. And I'm not trying to plug my current company, but our product is not a training product, but we are very interested in building blue team training tools because we think collectively that will be helpful for all of us for those reasons that I was just stating. So we're looking to build something, and we need help. So we want people to try out what we're doing to give us feedback on this. That'll be my only plug.
Seth, go ahead and plug your company, because it's very, very interesting on what you guys are doing.
Well, I appreciate that. So SpiderBat, we just very quickly. So what SpiderBat is doing is looking at attacks, but we look at attacks using a causal trace. So what caused what led to what, and so we realized when we were building this, internally, we would hack something, we would attack something, and one of us would share this causal trace with another one and say, hey, can you figure out what happened? And this was just us internally just testing, like, does this thing even work? And what we realized, it was actually kind of fun. It was like a puzzle to try to figure this stuff out. So we created a gamified version of that product, which we call Defend the Flag. And so we created these mini challenges where you just go in, see an attack, and ask you some questions that, through a typical investigation you would want to answer. How did they get in? How did they move laterally? Et cetera. And so we're trying to see if there's a dare there. And so we're hoping to expose these to more people. Not, certainly at the end of the day, if that sells more SpiderBat, great. But it's a free tool to just be able to share how these attacks actually navigate. What processes did they kick off? What files did they touch? What network connections did they open? And so you can see it more visually. And we do have some feedback from, there's a company that every week they're getting together with the team, running through a challenge as a team to help the junior analysts really understand what this attack did. And so we love that. They're not a customer, they're just using this as a training tool, and we're absolutely okay with that.
I'm so sorry. Seth, that what you just described is exactly what I think that this field is missing, because I think one of the most important things for threat hunters, incident response, SecOps, anybody who's got eyes on the screen all the time in the event, they need to, at the very beginning, at the very basic, what does normal traffic look like versus what does DDoS traffic look like? What does normal SMB traffic look like? RDP, what's normal and what's not? And you don't have to even interact just to see it, what does a ransomware attack look like on the back end of things? So I think that's so cool that you have that.
And for some of the training out there, I agree 100%. Doing this for the last 10, 15 years that I've been in the blue side, and getting the certification. I'm a certified expert in incident management. I've got anything that's blue out there, I've got in next to my name, whatever. But some of the ones that are really good, and I'm just going to plug a couple people here. Cover 6 Solutions. Our friend Ty Wilson, he's got a SOC analyst prep workshop that he does, which is superb. And whenever possible, whenever he's doing it, I send people to that course. The other one is in the UK, Blue Team.
Pretty blue
For
dot team.
Blue Dot Team, and they have level 1. They just launched a level 2 analyst. Um, great training that they have. And then there's the vendor specific ones that you mentioned. Uh, there's the Security Onion. There's the Wazoo. There's some of these other ones that are really, really good for those tools.
Which, by the
So
way, Security Onion does have a lot of free training out there also, just so people are aware. Not all training is paid for. So Security Onion, I've gone through and looked, especially after talking to Wes, because I didn't know they had free training. They have free training out there to learn their tools. Yes, here, and I'm going to bring it up because someone was discussing it in chat. Thank you, Jermaine. He found my channel because of my Security Onion videos. And I do plan on doing more. I'm working on a cloud-based lab to do more with it. But in order to give that type of training and that type of feel of what Security Onion can truly do and what a good security tool can do, to include Wazoo and Fleet, which I went over Fleet in my Security Onion videos. I just need to develop a better lab. And so I'm working on building out a cloud-based lab that'll be able to provide all that information. But yes, there's so many free trainings and free tools and so much you can do out there that if you don't do it, you're missing out.
Derek, put Jermaine's very large question there so we can tackle it together. Okay.
Oh, so in the last part of that, so as we look at this, so Splunk and other software log aggregators. So if you understand the goal of Splunk is trying to achieve, transitioning to another product, is it easy? Or won't it make transitioning to another product easy? I'm going to let someone else handle that question before I tackle it.
You guys have a guess, so you guys start.
I think what you guys are bringing up, and maybe what Jermaine's bringing up, is at the end of the day, you have to understand, and this is going to sound funny, what is the motivation of that tool? What is the tool? What is the process it's trying to ask you to adhere to? Log aggregation is great. Log analysis at the end of the day is a lot of what security analysts do to understand what happens. So getting into the logs and having a clean way to filter through and understand logs is a very useful tool. What a lot of the SIMs will do is they now want to create an event taxonomy. Splunk's try to crowdsource it. The problem, you can't really crowdsource event taxonomy because then you run into a bunch of different events that really end up meaning the same thing. So a lot of the more mature SIMs have built this event taxonomy that now I can now look at, well, what are all the authentication successes? Now I have to care that Windows calls it X and Linux calls it Y and Cisco calls it Z and application whatever, right? So understanding the motivation of that tool. Can you transition from Splunk to something else? Absolutely. You just need to understand what that tool is now doing with the data and what are these derivatives, as you go from log to event to alert to machine learning, finding and observation, right? These are all derivatives of data. And so the farther you get away from the true ground truth data, the more there's opportunity for something to get missed and omitted or misinterpreted. So you just have to take all of that into account.
Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tricky question, but just because you learn on Splunk and you're really good at Splunk doesn't mean that you're going to be terrible on another tool, right? It's totally, kind of what Seth said is kind of, recognizing that there are going to be variations and little differences in the information you're looking at. But at the end of the day, like the gist, the basics of it and how it rolls up, looking at the bigger picture of it will be easier as you move from solution to solution, if that that makes sense.
At the and I'll kind of close this a little bit, but at the base of every tool, every single tool that is out there is all log based. Okay, that's the basic event characteristic that goes through everything in cybersecurity. Okay, something happened at a certain point, and we've got to interpret what happened at that point or what's happening during that trail, that timeline. So, and you always have to have some sort of log collection and aggregator, because what you're doing is device 1 has its log, device 2 has its logs, device 3 has its logs. You put it all together, now you can see what's happening in your network. So now, the basic functions of a log aggregator like Elk or Splunk or Logarithm or any of those is to take all those logs, put them together, and say these are the same time, and it puts it all in the same timeline. Okay. Now you need something else to say if these things are happening in sequence, the signature is what's going to trigger an alarm, and that's what a SIM is. Security event, security incident, and event
Information
management.
management.
I always get them.
It happened.
Doing it for 15 years and I still mess it up. So that's what's going to put the rules on top of it. And then that's what the analyst is looking. Because if you had to do it the way, unfortunately, 15, 20 years ago, when I was looking at logs and spending a whole day looking through logs, trying to figure out what happened during the network, now that made it easier for us. Now we put machine learning on top of that. And now, like Seth was saying, the derivatives of it. Okay? But at the beginning, you have to use a log aggregator to bring in all the information to a center point so that you can analyze it. I hope I
Yeah,
answered.
definitely. And I think Sims, I got to be honest. So one of the first Sims I ever worked with was McAfee, and I used ESM, or in the Army we called it HBSS. I don't know why, but it was still McAfee at its core. It was still ESM. I'm not gonna lie. One of the things I loved about it was that I saw every log. So if I saw an increase in a certain log type, I can go in and look and say, okay, why is this one type of log increasing? Is it, whether it's auth failures or whatever the case may be? And when I went from that to logarithm, it was completely different because they don't show you every log in logarithm. They show you events. So if they don't consider it an event, or if you have not put in something to say, hey, this log type is an event, then you don't see it. So it was a completely different can of worms, but it's to the point of what Eric's saying is it's correlating all this stuff and it's aggregating all these logs and it's saying, hey, this is an event. This is something you might want to be concerned about. You may not be, but we're going to show you these things. And that's where the tuning and stuff like that came in. Whereas McAfee was all logs and then alarms. So you got to see all logs. And if there was an increase in a certain log type, you'd go investigate, well, why is this one log type triggering more than anything else or above normal? But I'm going to bring this back to what Sarah said, is knowing what's normal. I think a lot of organizations don't understand that concept of what is normal in their environment, and every environment is different. So if you do not have an analyst on staff that constantly looks at your flow, at what logs are coming around, what your bandwidth usage is, all these different things, they'll never know what's normal. And if you hire an MSSP that is coming in years later, after, who knows, you may have a breach sitting there already and don't know about it. So now they're going to come in, they're going to see your traffic, and they're going to say, okay, this is normal. So now you have to have basically a second breach on top of that first breach to even for them to see anything. And now they're going to eventually be like, oh, wait, you've been having data leaving your company for the past 5 years, and we're just now seeing it. So it is really one of those things that knowing what's normal. And I really hope that a lot of the blue team training out there, yes, someone finally got Dancing Granny. I love it. I love it. Dancing Granny. Again, if you're listening to this on podcast, keep listening, but you're missing out on Dancing Granny now. But I do think that we need to really reconcile with the fact that some companies come into security maturity later to where they don't know what's normal. And so that training comes into play where how do we train people to understand that you have to, if you're developing security late in the game, you might want to have someone come in and or at least have the know-how to be able to look for breaches that may already be there before you even bring in a sim or something like that that looks at what's normal. So I think that's part of Jermaine's question was, or not the original question, but one of his questions came down to, can we train on tuning or train on working with sims in such a way that we can program them and tune them and things of that nature? I say yes and no. You can, but it's all organizational dependent because every alarm, every system every organization is different. They're using different software. They're using different technologies. I mean, there's a different set of logs you're going to get and a different way to set up logging from a Cisco ASA versus a Palo Alto firewall with VPN and XDR. Palos now tie into Active Directory. So now they're configuring roles even more different because now they're tying into AD and doing things differently. So with all of this changing, it is very hard. Whereas Red Team is just, hey, learn a new hole to go through. There's going to be a new vulnerability somewhere. Just learn how to exploit it. And all the tools generally remain the same. Even if you're a pen tester and using Cobalt Strike and Metasploit, they're going to put the new exploits in there for you anyways, or you can go on to Exploit DB or whatever. And look, I'm going to call this out right now just because I'm a huge fan of tools as a pen tester. As a red teamer, I think you got to get a little bit more tricky. But as a pen tester, no, you don't know how to code. You don't. So for anybody going out there saying you need to know how to code to get into security, I'm going to smack you in the face. I'm going to say that. Go ahead, unsubscribe if you don't believe me.
What? Speaking of Infosec,
I saw your fingers, Eric. What do you want?
You don't need to know how to code to get into Infosec or cybersecurity.
Yeah.
Red team or blue team.
In blue team, as it is in red team, there are some things that will make your life easier.
Yes.
If you know some basic coding skills, but it is not a gatekeeping requirement. Looking at you.
Yep, we know who we're talking about.
Plus one for me. You definitely do not need to know how to code to do CTI.
No, and there's a lot of CTI that is a lot of manual work. It's all manual. Yeah. You got to be able to go on the dark net and scan and look for people and look for different things. CTI, I'm sorry.
On the what?
The dark net. The deep web.
What is the dark net?
You know damn well what I'm talking about, Eric.
It's the iceberg.
Web.
Dark web, dark net. It's all the same
dark
shit.
Net.
It's the same shit.
Carajo. I got to teach this guy. Carajo.
All right, look, hey, we're coming up to the top of the hour. So before we close it off at 8 o'clock exactly, I'm going to be doing the giveaway. Make sure you put in #BlueTeam if you want to get 1 month to try Hack Me. I'm letting you know that now, and we're going to continue this conversation. If you're on the podcast, you're missing out on giveaways. You can't get into them unless you're watching live. So I'm going to continue to be that way. Eric is a proud Hispanic in cybersecurity. As the founder of Raices, I would expect nothing less. And yes, I am going to plug right now the Raices mini-con we got coming up. So if you want to go ahead and get into that, we have a lot of big speakers. Eric, if you want to touch on that real quick, who we got coming up for Raices, let them know.
Yeah, so as some of you know, we're having our first virtual mini-con for 2021, December 4th from 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time to 5 Eastern Standard Time. We have a great lineup of speakers. We've got Devin Bryan, the global CISO for Carnival. We have Dr. Anshul Regi from Temple University Lab. We have Jose Morey. He's been a speaker at NASA, Forbes, Einstein Fellow. Deidre Diamond from CyberSN, and we've got a couple more that are still, confirming, but it's going to be a great, it's free. It's going to be online. Please go to www.raizescyber.org. Go ahead and put it up on the screen, raizescyber.org, and you'll see on the top there the mini-con. Go register. Go register early. We've got some really good door prices sponsored by Cyber Supply Drop. That's going to be there. You're going to have to register. We're being sponsored by the U.S. Cyber Games, Play Cyber, Cover 6 Solutions. Yeah, I talked about them earlier. Estiempo and more. So go look it up on raizescyber.org. Go register right now. Go run right now. Go.
Right now.
Right now.
Wait till the stream ends. Don't do it till after the stream is over.
Okay. Now we've got to give the giveaway.
We do. So now,
And
let me
what
pull
are
up
we
my
giving away tonight?
good old giveaway tool here. So,
What are we giving away tonight?
1 month of Try Hack Me is what we're giving away tonight. And who is going to be our winner? Eric, if you win, you better be giving it away to somebody.
Ding, ding. Yay!
Hey! Woo!
All right.
So, Dicho, I don't know who you are, so you need to get a hold of me on Twitter. Or head to my website and get a hold of me on there. There's a contact page. You got to give me, let me know. Making it hard, Dicho. Your name does not match anything I've seen. So I don't know who you are, but I do like that picture. Is that Pittsburgh? I mean, we are the city of bridges, so it might be.
Looks like New York. Yeah.
All right, it might be New York. Whatever. It is what it is.
Dude, you're showing.
Yeah, I got rid of it, okay? Don't judge me.
Cybersecurity.
I'm like minimizing screens, thinking my background will come up eventually, not realizing how many screens I had up at that time. I'm like, oh shit, they're all on this window. But look, it's been amazing having you guys here. And seriously, Dicho, get a hold of me. If he's not here and doesn't get a hold of me, I'm just going to keep the voucher for later. So I'll give it away to somebody eventually. But at the end of the day, we got Dancing Granny. If you're not, if you're listening to this again in audio on the podcast, please start following along on YouTube or Twitch or Facebook Live. I am on all three. Saying that it's been amazing having everybody here tonight. Go ahead, like, subscribe, comment. You know what to do. And if you are watching live, please come back later, comment, and everything else, because just like Eric and anybody else that has a YouTube channel, those comments, likes or dislikes. Honestly, if you don't like me, then go ahead and dislike. I don't fucking care. It is what it is.
Like me, don't like him.
But at the end of the day, look, I love you all. Seth, Sarah, thank you for joining. And Sarah, we are going to have you on again, I promise, because I so want to hear more about your journey and how you really, truly found cybersecurity. So maybe we'll do a journey
really nice
episode.
Seth, we don't want to have you back. Just we'll
I
have.
can totally understand that.
Oh no, Seth will come back. Seth's going to come back with a better mic though, and not be using his MacBook Pro. But I love you guys. Thank you for joining. Thank you for all your input. And honestly, it's been a blast. Without further ado, though, please feel free to hang out in the background. We'll catch up here in a little bit. And other than that, We are